All right, so if you flip over to the back of the page we left off with, where we were comparing our FDP, we're going to number this unit 6, and we're going to work on ordering FDP. So if you are ordering fractions, decimals, and percents, that means there's more than 2. If you're comparing them, there's just 2 values involved. Ordering is 3 or more. And you could be asked to order up to 4 different values. When you are ordering them, it's just like there was one example we did in class where we were comparing percents, and at the very last slide, the last question on the last slide, there was 1 decimal and 1%. And I told you that if you have values in different forms, you need to make sure they are all in the same form. So the very first thing, a lot of times they will do, not every time, but a lot of times, they will put your values in different forms. So the first step is going to convert all values to the same form. Now, for me, I like to put everything into percent form because percents are usually, people make less mistakes with ordering percents. But it doesn't have to be percent form. If none of your values are percents, if you have all fractions, then that wouldn't make sense to necessarily change everything to percents. Or if you had decimals and fractions, you could pick one of those two so you're not having to convert all your numbers. But if they give you one of each, I generally use percent form because there's less confusion in the ordering. I'm going to give you 2 examples. We need to make sure we know the vocabulary. So the first example I'm going to give you, I'm going to ask you to order the values from least to greatest. And the vocab word that you need to know for that, because on a test, they may not say least to greatest, they may use the vocab word, is ascending order. And we talked about that with integers, but I want to make sure we haven't forgotten it since our integer unit. So you're going to order the following values from least to greatest or in ascending order. So I'm going to give you 3 values. You could be asked to do up to 4, but nothing changes in your strategy if you have 4. I'm going to give you 1/2. I'm going to give you 0.7 and 45%. So, like this says up top, you want to convert all the values to the same form. So, in this instance, I have 1 fraction, 1 decimal, and 1%. Okay? So, if I didn't have any percents, I might not want to do percent form, but I'm going to go ahead and put these in percent form. So, first of all, real easy one here, 45%, that doesn't change at all. That's still 45%. 0.7 as a decimal, my decimal has to move 2 places to the right towards where the percent sign would be. So I go 1, 2 places. I'd have to put a 0 as a placeholder. So that would end up being 70%. And finally, 1/2. A lot of us have this one memorized already. That is 50%. If you did not have it memorized, you would either have to do long division to change it to a decimal, and then change the decimal to a percent, or create equivalent fractions where 100 is the denominator. But this is a simple enough fraction, most of us know it. So now, if I'm going to order these from least to greatest, or in ascending order, my smallest value, I'm going to number them for right now. My smallest value would be that 45%, followed by 50%, and then 70%. So then below that, I'm going to write my answer. And when I write my answer, just like when we were working with integers, I want to put my answer in the original form. So 45% was the smallest value that would be listed first. That originally was 45%. My second value was 50%, but its original form was 1/2. And then my biggest value was 70%. Its original form was 0.7. All right, in my next example, I'm going to ask you to order these values from greatest to least. So going the other direction. And the vocab word for that is descending. So again, a little refresher on the vocabulary, since it's been a little while since we have discussed it with integers. So order from greatest to least or in descending order. This time I will give you 4 values because you can be asked to order up to 4 values. So the first one is 0.8%. Then I will have 0.7, 0.63, and a fraction here of 8/9. So just like I did in the first example, I want to make sure they're all in the same form. Okay, now I do have a percent form here, so I'll probably go ahead and put everything in percent form. If I didn't have that one, it might be easier to do decimal form, since I already have 2 that are in the decimal form. But since I have a percent, I'm just going to go ahead and do the percent form. Again, there tends to be less confusion with that. But if you want to put everything in decimal form, since 2 are already decimals, you're welcome to. For our notes, we'll put it in percent form. All right, so I'm going to start with 0.8%. Now, this is actually probably the trickiest part. Most students want to go ahead and move the decimal point 2 places. However, this is already in percent form because there's already a percent sign. So this is going to stay 0.8%. It's a very small percentage. It is less than 1%, but it is already in percent form. This next one, 0.7, that is in decimal form, so I have to move my decimal point 1, 2 places to the right, just like the number, just like the decimal I had up top. And tack a 0 as a placeholder, so that would be 70%. All right, then my 0.63, in percent form, I move my decimal point 2 places. That becomes 63%. And this is actually probably the trickiest one right here, the 8/9. So we talked about tricks, or a trick, for converting ninths as a fraction into a decimal. So 8/9 is going to be a repeating decimal. I'm going to kind of do this over to the side here. It's on the end, so it works out well. I can write it next to it. And the numerator for ninths is the repeating decimal. So I have 0.88888. 8 keeps repeating, okay? So if I have that repeating decimal and then I move my decimal point 2 places to the right to turn it into percent form, that would give me 88.8. Then you can draw the line over it for repeating percent. So now I need to number them. So that way I make sure I have my order figured out before I try and write everything back in its original form. Don't forget, this time I'm going from greatest to least. So I'm starting with the biggest value. So this is probably the most obvious at this point. My biggest value is going to be that 88.8% that is repeating. So that's going to be the first one I list. Then my next biggest value. It is not going to be the 0.8% because, again, that's not 80%. It's 0.8%. It is less than 1% because my whole number is a 0. My whole number here is a 0. My whole number here is a 70. My whole number here is 63. My whole number here is 88. So that is not my next one. That's actually going to be the last one. That's going to be my smallest. So actually, I can go ahead and write in my 4. It's going to be the fourth one at the very end because its whole number is the smallest. But after I list my biggest one of 88.8 repeating percent, next would come 70, going in descending order, followed by the 63%. So that would be the third one I list. And then again, finally that 0.8%. So now I'm going to write my answer. And a lot of times it is easier if you number them first before you try and write everything out where it needs to be in that original form, just so that you have it all laid out before you're not trying to do too many steps in your head, basically. So I'm going to go ahead, that 88.8%, that originally was 8/9. Okay, number 2 was the 70%, that originally was 0.7. Okay. Then number 3 was the 0.63. And then the smallest was the, again, in its original form, it was the same, 0.8%. So again, watch out for if you have a decimal that is also a percent, it's already in percent form, it's just a very small percent. Don't move that decimal to put it into percent form because it's already in percent form. So if you instead had wanted to put these in decimals instead of percents, here's my decimal for the 8/9. These two are already decimals, and I would have moved my decimal point 2 places to the left for that 0.8%. So it would have a few zeros in front of it. It would actually have 1, 2, it would have 2 zeros in front of that 8. If I had put it in decimal form. So that is an alternative. You could have put everything in decimal form. I, as a rule of thumb, put everything in percents, but as long as they're all in the same form, it doesn't matter which form as long as it's all the same form.